Although I don't know a lot about Landsberg's other work, fortunately I don't read German or French. This is the only thing I can find translated. I would describe his approach generally as a phenomenological, or he is a phenomenologist, which is a 20th century approach to philosophy. And I mention that because of the brief reference here to a philosopher named Max Scheler, a little bit older than Landsberg, another early 20th century philosopher, in section 2. And I point that out because one can see certain connections here with the title of the work, Experience of Death, and the, might say, the goal of the work to bring death into, or philosophically speaking, into human experience rather than sort of banish it as this metaphysical other or bare notion of limit that the Epicurean view seems to force upon us. Scheler was also a phenomenologist, and what phenomenology was or is, people I guess still do it as many things, but in its sort of the founder of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl, another German philosopher, meant it, at least in part, to be a purely descriptive philosophy. That is, that is the philosophy that actually described the things that appear in human experience as they appear, without making any assumptions about what they must be, sort of purely describe it. And the important thing here is, of course, that makes problematic a phenomenology of death, if death is what Epicurus said. So death has to somehow be an experience within life. That is actually an experience of death in order to be treated phenomenologically. And Max Scheler, apparently, this is also an untranslated work of Scheler's, solves that problem. How do you phenomenologically describe something which doesn't seem to be ever part of our experience? How do you describe the experience of the unexperiencable? Well, he makes it experienceable, seemingly, by describing the process of growing old. That is, I guess the thesis here is that the real human experience of death is the process of aging, which is very interesting. The notion that is, we are introduced to death by the decay of our own bodies and perhaps our minds. Very interesting references here to Scheler's idea of how our life consciousness change when we age. Death is a limiting point. The structure of our life changes noticeably at every moment. The pressure of the past grows heavier, and the possibilities of the future more narrow. Man feels himself less and less free, etc., which is very interesting and something that probably great to read. But in any case, Landsberg more or less dismisses this. This is not an experience of death. This is an experience of aging, which is not death. And he immediately points out that, well, I mean, not everybody dies of old age, even if that's not biologically correct. Nobody actually dies of old age. As he says, old age makes us more vulnerable to the things that kill us, rather than old age killing us directly. But Landsberg points out that not everybody grows old. I mean, death can come at any point. So he says on the top page 196, this is Landsberg, but man's experience of the necessity of his own death has nothing in common with the hypothesis of the natural death of the organism. It is evident to me not only that I must die once, that is to say, when I have reached the limiting point of natural death, but also that I am face to face at every moment of my life, now and always, with the immediate possibility of death. Death is very close to me. Of course, sounds similar to the kind of things that Jonas was saying when he was talking about the burden of mortality built into the very structure of the metabolizing organism, the constant struggle to maintain life, which is a constant struggle, biological life, which is also a constant struggle to fend off the imminent possibility of death. But as we'll see, Landsberg really distinguishes himself from Jonas's position, and I think that ultimately Landsberg would have to say that Jonas just misses the point of death, because he more or less stays on the level of the organism without treating where the action really is, which is the level of our personhood, what Landsberg sometimes calls spirit, not the level of our animal nature, our biological nature. And this notion of the immediate possibility of death, again, seems to be associated in Landsberg's mind with the necessity of death. And this is something I borrowed from Landsberg without really knowing it, but he says on page 196, again, referring to death, he says it is an absent presence. That's pretty good, I think, in a way of describing how death is actually part of experience rather than something beyond experience. That it is an absent presence. It's here, but it's here as absent. It's a reality, but its reality is not like the reality of the things that meet us in our immediate experience. For me, the cell phone is present as an object, and therefore part of my experience. But maybe not everything in my experience is that way. Some things present themselves as absent, which is mysterious, but an intriguing and very sensible way to describe what death really is to us. He says of death, again, it is an absent presence. Thus, the problem of the human experience of the necessity of death reaches beyond biology. In a way, just sort of totally dismissing the empirical basis for how we become aware of the necessity of death. Because what we experience, seemingly, in terms of our common sense view of the world, either experience directly or indirectly, is death as a biological phenomenon. But if it is indeed person, the death of the person, that's important, then it's not going to have an inductive basis, cases being generalized. What is the difference between the death of an organism and the death of a person? It's mysterious, unclear at this point, but that seems to be the distinction that we have to make. Now, if we look then at section 3, it really kind of follows from that distinction. He asks in the beginning of section 3, but is man capable of an experience of such a kind, an experience of the necessity of death? Well, of course, only if in some way or another human beings, transcend their biology, transcend their merely physical, biological reality and present another reality entirely. So let's do another one on section 3.